Thank you. We have one mic tonight, so bear with us. I am just so excited to have a full house here, and thank you for making the time to come out and kind of hear what this whole thing about mobility justice is, because I know this isn't something that we sit around the table and have conversations about. And I'd like to just start with the conversation of, like, how did you even get into this work about mobility justice, whether it's around biking or walking or using public transit, and why is it so important in this time?
I got into thinking about that through wanting to be able to ride a bike in Long Beach. I was living in Long Beach in 2007, and I'd gotten all into this biking thing. I'd gone to college up in Portland, Oregon, up north. They are really into bicycles up there. The way people reacted to me was so scary, So I'm like, at the time I was working on my Ph.D. in anthropology, and anthropology is not a well-known discipline. It tends to stay really hidden from the public eye. But we anthropologists, we're obsessed with power. We're like, how does power work? How do people tell each other, behave this way, don't behave this way, live under this system, you can't break out of it. Like, how do we do that to each other? And I couldn't help but see some connections. I'm like, I'm out there in the street. People are telling me you're moving wrong. I'm in the classroom, the professor and the readings are saying, how do people act out power on each other? I'm like, seems like there's a relationship here. And so I just started, I was privileged to be a student. And so I got to start asking questions. I got to start spending time in spaces, learned about the field of transportation. I didn't know anything about it. And learned that there were some big blind spots.
When I moved to Sacramento in 2016, working a part of the California Bicycle Coalition, which is an advocacy nonprofit working on bikes, but a whole intersecting issues, there was a huge void that I saw around justice and transportation and mobility. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody was working towards it. There were some folks, but it just didn't seem to be a top issue for the elected officials, for advocates, for just the general kind of scene in Sacramento. So I reached out to folks. Adonia was one of the first people that I spoke to about, like, what can I do? How can I harness this? What's my role? Who can I connect with? And along with Yolanda and many others, just kind of being a humble learner and student of the space and trying to bring that into policy and shifting those structures of power, which are incredibly difficult up in Sacramento over the years, has been kind of my bread and butter, my inspiration, something I've been trying to do for some time, and coming up to difficult things along the way. So
just moving into kind of the fact that we have power over what comes next if we step up to it. And so we are in this crucial moment now where we're navigating ICE, the immigration chaos, the targeting of BIPOC lives when we walk outside our door. I mean, how could we possibly think about riding a bike or walking or using public transit, really? But that's what we do. We're going to show up. So I guess my question to you next is, how are you showing up in your places of work, places of thought, policy, in this time?
In transportation research, we don't have ways of talking about, like, oh, well, how can you have bike to work week at a time when so many people are scared and staying off the streets? So me speaking as a researcher, as someone who, works in transportation policy and then also works on figuring out this mobility justice thing with a national network, how do we just kind of get the story right in terms of giving an accurate picture of what's going on?
I'm just thinking back to 2020, which wasn't too long ago, but with the killing, the murder of George Floyd, there was like just so much energy that came about that like transferred over to the policy kind of political space that I was like, it was just awesome to see like, oh, the politicians need to listen to us. They feel this pressure. They need to react or act in some way. And there's just been such a slide in many ways since then, and it's hard to find place to find this joy. And I guess, this question of like, how do we find it within ourselves and our communities is like, how do we do that within that dark shadow, with all these pressures? So
Is there anything you feel we're getting right, or is it just getting worse as we try to have the conversation about mobility in our communities, as we have taken buses or walked or drove or flown into planes into LA? What is working? Do you see anything working? And what is just extremely worse?
2022 was when I started working at the research institute I'm at UCLA and got appointed to the State Transportation Commission. I started getting a much bigger view of our state transportation system, which has a lot of money in it. And over the past few years, I've started to get more focused on, in terms of mobility justice, how do we get more of that money to the communities that have been shut out? There's a lot of ways that people have expertise. This is something that's really clear in the mobility justice space. People have expertise that's not construction, it's not being a traffic engineer, but they know how to get people engaged in thinking about how we use our transportation systems and help people feel a little more comfortable trying something new. It's people like Yolanda. So my perspective on mobility justice now versus in 2022, I'm like, how do we figure out getting more of our transportation dollars invested in people to support the kind of transportation culture we want to be part of?
I mean, the biggest shift has been, I guess, in the dialogue and narrative and some of the positions of power. I mean, like Adonia, you're now on the state commission, which is huge, and asking these questions like that certainly wasn't there before 2022. So the conversation has certainly shifted, but it does come down to the money, the funding. Like, where is this going exactly? How is it being spent? How can that be changed in the bureaucratic structures of our state and governmental decision processes across different levels? And I don't have a lot of hope there, but like to see this room so full is kind of where like my hope is, to be honest. To see folks like interested, wanting to be engaged, want to know more, want to get involved, want to learn. I mean, it's probably been the most hopeful moment for me the past couple of years.
Who are some of the, what do you feel are some of the missing voices, that we don't have at the table? How can we uplift them so that we can have stronger policy and also to bring them to the table and have this conversation about actually evolving the conversation around mobility justice?
I got to help work on a project a few years ago that is called the Untokening 1.0 Principles of Mobility Justice. It's like a vision statement, kind of opening up some of the ideas that folks from around the country who came together to work on this project were seeing as what we wanted to move forward in our communities around mobility. I'm currently working on a project that is taking that like principles statement and working towards something that's more like an evaluation tool that you could use to look at a transportation project and say where there should be mobility justice benefits and whether they're there.
Every year, for example, the environmental justice movement comes to Sacramento, Black and brown folks coming to lobby the elected officials at the Capitol. That's not happening in the mobility kind of transportation space. They have like an organization or a coalition to organize that, to set that up for folks to do that is something that we're, I think, hoping we can do. But also, we need to connect with other movements, other movements that are also struggling and seeing step backs as well within their spaces. But just continuing to push the doors open wider. And again, as always, putting pressure on our elected officials up there in Sacramento is where my focus has been.
There's something my therapist told me, which is we hear criticism much louder than we hear positive things. So we all have that voice in our heads that's like, oh, you did this wrong. When you're hearing feedback, you might hear the negative more. We have to make an effort to uplift the positive, right? So that's why we need to talk about joy and notice when we're feeling it, so that all the times when we're not, we have, a North Star that we can be pointing to.
I've been saying a lot about like government, the state, politicians. To be honest, joy is not in that realm for me, and I don't think it should be for any of us, to be quite honest. So the joy is like spontaneous joy. I'm reading this book right now called Animal Joy. Like there's just something about our primal instincts like that I want to harness, that I think we all should harness, and I think biking, walking, being in our bodies, being embodied beings is a very joyful thing that I think brings us all together on this topic. So I think that's very much needed. I'm very pessimistic, but I have a lot of joy, believe it or not. I have a ton of joy.
The work that you all are doing bring me joy. And we need more folks like Adonia and Jared and even myself. Like, we don't want clones, but we want you to basically hear us and to plant that seed so that you in your neighborhood start right in your block, in terms of sharing with everybody that's here tonight, things to think about with all this still coming in this reality in LA.
So I would just say, I think it's going to be super important to ensure that there are community voices and community leadership in the spaces where, groups who have influence are talking about mobility and transportation when it comes to getting ready for these mega events.
Us together, just keep demanding more, like keep pushing back against, keep advocating, keep asking. I don't know. It's just there needs to be, more movements. Like I mentioned earlier, interconnected, but yeah, just things rising up. I would love to see more of in many different ways. So appreciate you being here and listening to me and us.
All right, thank you all.
Have a good evening, everybody. Thanks again for coming out.